Here's Matt Powell with a response to atheism.
If I was to tell you that a rock appeared in this room that I'm filming in from nothing, you would say that I am not a valid source of information, that I've bought into a lie.
Yeah, but if you were to say that God made a rock appear out of nothing, that would also disqualify you as a trustworthy source of information and convince me that you bought into a lie, a completely nonsensical one at that.
Well, that's exactly what atheism is. It's the idea that everything could have appeared from nothing with no God. That is a belief in magic. That's mysticism and sorcery. That is not science.
I don't believe that there ever was nothing. There was never a time that nothing existed. Therefore, I do not believe that the universe came from nothing. The universe has always been here. It's been here for all of the 13.7 billion years that time has been passing.
And so I've actually asked certain atheists, would you become a Christian if Christianity were true? And they will say no.
What do you mean by become a Christian? If being a Christian does not merely mean that you believe that Christianity is true, what does it mean?
And that shows us that they're more about emotions. They're more about feelings and experiences instead of demonstrated fact.
Since I don't understand what it means for God to exist, I don't know what it would mean for Christianity to be true, so it's impossible for me to say whether I would become a Christian if I believed in the tenets of that religion. Would it mean worshiping God? Even if you could demonstrate it to be a fact that God exists, if I don't feel compelled to worship him, then the best I could do is go through the motions of worshiping him. If you don't feel like God is worthy of worship, any worshiping you do would be insincere, no matter what you believe the facts to be.
Look, if you're an atheist, there's no way to determine what's right and wrong. And so everything is based on feelings. Remember, it's about a feeling rather than what fact is and what science has shown us and the things that we can know for sure. It's more about emotions.
What do you mean by right or wrong? Do you mean moral right and wrong, or do you mean factually correct and incorrect? Those are two different things. You don't need a God to discern what is correct from incorrect. And I think you do need to consider feelings to have morality. I have no interest in any moral system that doesn't put the relief of suffering, which is a feeling, especially the suffering of those who suffer the most, ahead of any other consideration. If God doesn't command us to prioritize relieving the suffering of those who suffer the most, then I'm not going to care about his moral system. Why should I?
And so we're left with emotional experiences and just feelings that would tell us what to do if there is no God. And a lot of people are going to have a lot of different feelings. And so it's going to be nothing but chaos if we take an atheistic perspective of the origin of the universe and of our existence.
Okay, first of all, that guy was not an atheist. I've never once seen any quote from him saying that he was an atheist or that he did not believe in God. He makes several references to God in that book that he wrote while he was in prison. Apologists will of course insist that he was lying, but that's an unfalsifiable claim. Sometimes I hear apologists bring up a book called Tischgespräche, in which he supposedly confesses his atheism. In that book he strongly criticized Christianity, but actually rejected atheism and expressed his desire to fight against Soviet atheism. And if the result of an atheistic perspective is chaos, why don't we see that chaos in countries with low rates of religiosity? Places like Japan and Denmark have their problems, but they seem a lot less chaotic than the much more religious United States.
And one thing we need to understand is that atheists actually have the worst statistics in the world for doing some of the most reprehensible things known to man. They lead the world in school shootings. Now keep in mind, they only make up a small percentage of the population, yet they lead the world in school shootings. That means there is a correlation between atheism and school shootings.
Matt doesn't say where he gets this idea, so I did some digging, and the only thing I could find was an article on a site called crimeresearch.org that made a list of several shootings, looked at how many of the news articles covering them mentioned the religion of the perpetrator, and inferred that if interviews with the killer's family and friends don't reveal anything about their religious views, and the press can't find the killers being affiliated with any religion, at the very least they don't have significant religious views. Not only is this a non sequitur, the mere fact that the reporters didn't see fit to mention religion doesn't mean that it wasn't significant. There's also a pretty big difference between one's religious views being insignificant and being an atheist.
Denying God, denying reality, and going and shooting up innocent people. Atheists also lead the world in drug use. Drugs put you into a fantasy land, yet they'll declare that we're living in fantasy land as Christians. But look, if your demographic is leading the world in drug use, you're leading the world and living in a fantasy, in this euphoria where you're seeing things that don't even exist because you're in such a mind-altered state. Yeah, that's not good. You don't want to be associated with that.
I don't know where Matt gets this idea either, but if it's true, I suspect it's because atheists don't live under tyrannical Karenocracies that get all up in your business about how you spend your free time. There are many despotic places that have low rates of drug use because of their draconian laws. That's not a trade-off I'm willing to make. That's a cure worse than the disease.
Atheists also lead the world in suicide. And that's a very sad thing. That's why I don't want you to be one anymore if you are one. So if you are poisoning people's minds and telling them there's no creator, magic is real. We appeared from nothing, just like a rock appeared out of nowhere. Whole universe just appeared out of nowhere, folks.
That's what you believe. You believe that God made the whole universe appear out of nowhere. This idea doesn't become any less magical just because you add a magician to it.
When you get somebody to believe a big lie like that, that actually does affect their understanding of the world. People are so confused today, and you'll find that many will act like animals. And the reason they act like animals is because they believe we are animals.
Well, what are we? Plants? Of what taxonomic kingdom do you think the species Homo sapiens belongs?
Atheists also lead the world in drunkenness. Drunkenness puts you into fantasy land. It is a poison-induced experience that you get from drinking alcohol and putting a poisonous substance into your body.
I guess you think it magically turns from poison into blood when you take communion, huh? Why did Jesus turn water into wine if this is such a horrible thing?
Let me tell you, people often say that the devil does not exist, yet they do things that really can only be explained by the intervention of Satan on this earth. How do you get all these terrible things that happen? How do you get all these horrible people that exist that go and trick other people? How does that happen? The existence of Satan perfectly explains why this happens.
How does the existence of Satan explain people causing each other suffering? What explains why Satan causes people to suffer? If it's because he's motivated by resentment and hate, why can't humans be motivated by those things all on their own? Why does Satan need to be involved in order to explain it?
You don't want to be proud to be an atheist, because it's nothing to be proud of.
I agree. I'm not proud to be an atheist because it isn't an accomplishment, and I see no point in being proud of things I didn't accomplish. I'm an atheist because I am incapable of understanding what it means to say that a God exists. I can't help but be an atheist.
In fact, like I said, you're joining a group of people that leads the world in the most reprehensible acts that have ever been known to man.
If the global flood had really happened, there is no human act that has ever been committed that has ever caused as much harm and suffering.
And some of you atheists out there will say that Christians are hypocritical. I can't be a Christian because I'm not going to be a hypocrite. Hypocrisy isn't even wrong if there's no God. So you can't even have a moral argument in this case because there's no objective morality to begin with.
That's not a moral argument. That's just an explanation of motivation. You don't need to believe hypocrisy to be objectively wrong in order to wish to avoid it.
And then number two, just because certain Christians fail to live the Bible doesn't mean that the Bible isn't true.
Point me to a single atheist who has ever made that argument.
If I played Claire de Lune on the piano and I messed it up, does that mean that the author of Claire de Lune was a bad artist? No. Us Christians are fallible people, but we're trying to follow an infallible book. We are imperfect. We have fallen short of God's grace, but we are trying to follow a perfect Redeemer, a perfect Savior. We are finite creatures as humans, but God is infinite. He is so far beyond us in understanding.
Sounds pointlessly Sisyphean to me.
On the origin of life, we win. Christianity comes out on top, but they will mock the virgin birth, say, oh, how could a virgin conceive? Atheists believe that rocks conceived life.
More specifically, we see that life is made out of chemicals, and we see those same chemicals in rocks, and we infer that the chemicals that make up life came from those rocks. In fact, we can see, for example, that the sodium ions that power your nervous system sometimes come from eating salt, which is essentially a kind of rock. It's far from absurd to say that the components of life come from rocks when we can see the living processes of our bodies incorporate chemicals from the rocks that we eat.
You can look it up. You can type in online. Just type in these words. You owe your life to rock. brings up a paper that explains why secular humanism is a valid explanation and we descended from minerals that were eroded from rocks.
Nowhere in that article does the term secular humanism appear once. Secular humanism is not an explanation for anything. It's an ethos, not a theory about the origin of life.
Some will mock the idea that God created man from the dust of the ground, yet they believe that lightning sparked life into existence. Just like Frankenstein, just like science fiction, that lightning could create life, something that destroys life. Sparked life into existence? Are you kidding me?
More specifically, I've heard the claim that it catalyzed the formation of amino acids which are necessary for life. The Miller-Urey experiment showed that the application of electricity to simpler compounds caused these amino acids to form. That's not the same thing as causing life to exist.
And I've also heard them say that it's ridiculous that Jesus could have risen from the dead. How could you believe that as Christians? You're crazy? Look, they think every living organism descended from dead material.
We infer that from the fact that we can see it is currently composed of non-living chemicals. Is it really all that much of a stretch to infer that organisms made entirely of chemicals came from chemicals? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.